I'm Catherine Arndt, the Chief of the VLGA Connect Studio. Welcome to today's episode, brought to you by the VLGA, your counsellor support network and the national broadcaster on all things local government.
Hi everyone, it's TGU time. I still get asked, what does that mean? Well, it's simply the governance update, which we used to call the program Someone decided that wasn't sexy enough. So we call it TGU, brought to you by Hunt and Hunt Lawyers. You can hear Julie Reid laughing in the background. I'll come to you in a second, Julie. I'm going to say hello to, because I mentioned Hunt and Hunt Lawyers, Tony Raunic first, our sponsor and resident legal eagle. Hello, Tony.
And no one's told me you're not sexy enough, Chris. It's we've got lots of viewers who are just tuning in to hear your voice, mate.
I'm sure that's not true. They're here to hear Julie Reid's voice. Hi, Julie.
That's right. That's enough of that kind of talk, guys, please. Well, let's keep this a reputable segment today. Thank you.
Never any doubt about the reputation of this group and this program. Lots to talk about. It's been another busy week. Lots of mayoral elections, which we'll get into in a little while. We've got the news on the Glenelg Shire monitors that have been announced. A little more clarity on what could be happening at Strathbogie. We've got some inner city councils that are poking the bear a little bit, I think. We'll ask what Tony and Julie perhaps think about some of that coming up. Councils winning awards. Gosh, so much to talk about. The Ombudsman has weighed in on a couple of councils in this past week or so, and council meeting processes are getting a bit of a run too, and briefing sessions. So where do we start, guys? Shall we start with the Glenelg Shire monitors? We've been wondering who they'd be and where they'd come from, and now we know. Jim Gifford, former bureaucrat, very heavily involved in the legislative side at Local Government Victoria there for a long time. He's the first monitor announced, and the second, I think it's fair to say, I've done a bit of a poll of a few people around the sector, a left field surprise announcement with Steve Kingshott being announced there. What do we think about these appointments?
Well, as you say, they both got, they do both have local government experience. I think Stephen was a councillor in Williamstown City Council when it was constituted back, what would have been, in the 1990s, I guess.
Mid to late 90s. I think it was Mayor 96, 97, somewhere around there. A well-known name in the Hobsons Bay area. You know, the portraits on the wall is one of those Williamstown mayors from that era before Hobsons Bay was created.
Yeah, and he has that sort of executive board experience at Melbourne Water. So, look, they both they've got a short initial term, at least 3 months. So I guess they've had to hit the ground running quickly. And you know, there was it seems like the government might have struggled to fill those positions, and it took some time for those announcements. And I think Stephen was only announced at some stage this week after the term had commenced.
That's right. Yeah, and it's interesting that he actually has an organisational development and risk management background as well, coming from Exxon Mobil. So an interesting mix there of that risk side of things and organisational development. So we'll bring a different dimension, I suppose, to the role, but it is interesting that the mix overall is very different to what we would normally see in monitors, suggesting maybe that the monitor list is maybe a little bit slim at the moment, maybe needs to expand a bit more. But, you know, give them a chance, see how they go for 3 months. That's typical that they would appoint for 3 months and then continue to extend depending on how they go in that time, report back to the minister at that 3-month mark, which is always, I think, a good idea.
Yeah. Now, I do have to correct the record there. When I said the 96, 97, I realised something didn't quite gel, and I've just double-checked while you're talking, Julie, the minister's announcement. They've referred to Steve Kingshott as the former mayor of Williamstown, but of course, 96, 97 was post-amalgamation. So I've also just gone back to my trusty list of former mayors of Hobsons Bay, and he was, of course, the first mayor of Hobsons Bay post amalgamation in 1996-97 with another very well-known councillor of that era, Brad Matheson, as the deputy mayor. So let's just get that fact straight. But the fact remains that we're nearly, well, don't want to say 30 years, but getting on towards that period of time since Steve Kingshot's been involved in the sector. So perhaps a bit of a learning curve there to come up to speed with the current state of play.
Yeah, but I think that, with this organisational background, this risk lens, will bring a different dimension to, and fresh eyes, I think, to how the council are operating. So, it'll be an interesting to hear what they report and how where the emphasis is.
Glenelg has also appointed an acting CEO this past week, and it's an experienced CEO, Greg Wood, who was the CEO of Hindmarsh for quite some time. He's stepping in for a period, they're saying, of about 6 months while they do a recruitment process there, of course, because Paul Phelan was one of those high-profile resignations recently, along with a couple of councillors at Glenelg. So the other one we're keeping an eye on is Strathbogie, as has been reported, particularly in the local press. The Euroa Gazette has been right on this story in recent times. The minister is said to be considering why or why not to suspend the council, given the issues there in keeping a full complement around the council table. That's perhaps been exacerbated by the confirmation now that Councillor-elect Shirley Saywell, who won a countback as the only remaining eligible candidate back in August, has now confirmed she will not be taking up the position, has not been sworn in. The position remains an extraordinary vacancy. Those two extraordinary vacancies still showing on the council website, and no information yet about countbacks or by-elections, which could be a hint as to what's coming.
Yeah, it's very, very quiet in that space. So one can only suggest that there's lots of contemplation happening by the minister about what to do.
Well, and there's a monitor's report, of course, sitting on her desk as well. We don't know what that says, but obviously that's a relevant input into that consideration, Tony.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. And I think Shirley Saywell, in writing to the CEO, Julie Salomon, on the 9th of November, she says, it was a difficult decision, but she said she wanted to be part of a high functioning and progressive council, but unfortunately, it is clear this is not possible at this time. So I guess she's both referring to the state of council affairs there at the moment, and perhaps her view about what's likely to come.
Making it pretty clear how she feels the situation would work under the current circumstances. Okay, so we wait for more news out of Strathbogie. I'm going to jump to a story that I do have in the list out of Strathbogie. It's made a decision that it flagged, I think, a few months ago to get out of its responsibilities of being the waterway manager for Goulburn River. This has been costing the council, they estimate, up to $200,000 a year. They were looking for the state government to step in and assist with those costs. They've been unsuccessful there, so they're saying, we're out. This is also the council that really called the government called the government's bluff, I guess you could say, over school crossing supervisors, Julie, earlier in the year. Or Tony.
That's right. Yeah, and good on them, because, they're obviously realising that they can't manage everything, and the costs are just so extraordinary that they need, obviously, help in that respect. So maybe there's a financial sustainability issue at play here. But it's interesting, the mayor said that the decision was a challenging one, but the council was unable to secure funding from the government to continue in the role. So delivering the service, they're saying, is costing the ratepayers between $150,000 to $200,000 a year. So they just obviously, they're saying they need to watch every cent of spending, and they can no longer continue to fund and deliver the programs that are the responsibility ultimately of state and federal government. So,
well, and that's what I was going to ask Tony about. Obviously within the council's power to do that. It was a responsibility that I wasn't aware of until this first started being discussed. I'm assuming there are other councils around the state that have those waterway management responsibilities.
Yeah, that's right. So I think as part of this overall cost shift, that of course has been a phenomenon across the sector for a long, long time, but we're increasingly seeing loud voices in the sector advocating for some action from government. Councillor Jim McGee is certainly, I think, one of the leaders of that at Glenelg. So we might perhaps anticipate that some other councils might be looking at programs such as this, and whether it's seeking to create a bluff that the state government may or may not call. I think that was successful for Strathbogie, as you said, in relation to school crossing supervisors some months back, when they threatened to pull out, and then they got some funding, additional funding, or whether it's ultimately a decision that, as Laura Binks, the mayor of Strathbogie, said, we've just, at the end of the day, we've just got to watch every cent, and we've got no option here. We're pulling out. We might see that repeated at some councils.
All right, watch this space on that one. I mentioned some inner city councils making some decisions that could prove contentious. Let's start with Yarra. This has got quite a bit of media coverage. Yarra voted this week to extend what had been a limited trial on some Fitzroy and Collingwood streets for 30 km/h speed limits. They want to extend that to pretty much all of those two suburbs, with some notable exceptions. Interesting here, Julie and Tony, this will only go ahead with the state government approval, which is required.
That's right.
But also external funding. And I wondered, how much external funding do you need to change some speed limit signs? I know that's a very simplistic question, but there's obviously some other things that need to be done.
Yeah, there is a cost associated with all of these changes. So, but yeah, look, they voted to lower the speed limit in Fitzroy and Collingwood, they're saying. They did a study which found that 80% of crashes on roads in those areas involve cyclists, pedestrians, and motorcyclists. So, that they are pretty certain, as a result of that study, that there needs to be something done to try and reduce the crashes. And we have heard across many cities where they're moving in this direction. In actual fact, when I was over in London recently, there were signs everywhere to say that they were moving towards lower speed limits in inner city areas in London. So this is
as low as 30 km/h,
yeah,
or are they miles per hour there? Or?
I think they were would it be 20 miles per hour? I think it
Right.
might have been. It was very low, so that might be roughly equivalent. I don't know, but anyway, it's roughly. So they were looking at very low speed limits, and I might look that up actually to see where they've got with that. But I think that this is fairly typical of what's happening across the Western world, in particular, in these streets, to slow people down, to minimise the damage when people get in this situation where there are tight streets, there are lots of pedestrians, there are lots of motorcyclists, and lots of cyclists in particular. We've seen a growth in cyclists in the inner city areas as well, as you know. So
and a big tick, Julie, because Google says 20 miles per hour is 32 km/h.
So there you go. Yeah. So anyway, look, I think it's worth a try. I think it's worth a try, and it's good that they're going to have a look at that. Let's hope the government give them approval. But I suspect that the government are moving towards, wanting lower casualties and lower
there's a lot of talk about that, isn't there? Because we've got road toll issues. But this is a different proposition in inner city streets with pedestrians, cyclists, etc., to the major fatalities we're obviously seeing on highways, etc. Tony?
Yeah, look, I think this will be very popular in Yarra, among the Yarra residents and constituents, I would think. And that, I think, is reflected by the fact that it's a unanimous resolution of all the councillors at Yarra. I think where it won't be popular is those motorists that traverse through Fitzroy and Collingwood to get to and from the CBD. And so the state government, who has that much more broader lens, I suppose, has to then balance. We could reduce the speed limits to 15 kilometres an hour, and it'd be even safer. So they have to balance. Where is the tipping point? Where's appropriate in terms of the impact on commerce, and
Mm.
it does create a cost and a to freight and other sort of services that travel through, having to slow them down. So I think it's a decision that the state government will need to make in terms of the impact it has on travel times across across the metropolitan area. But I think as it would reflect the wishes of the Yarra community, and that's what you want the Yarra councillors to do, don't you? Yeah.
Chris, I've just looked up the Transport for London announcement, where they have said that they're accelerating the introduction of the new 20-mile-per-hour speed limits in the capital to improve safety. So they have introduced it into 17 miles of road in routes in inner city areas. And almost all roads in the boroughs have now a consistent 20-mile-per-hour speed limit. So if it's good enough for Transport for London, it's good enough for the state government. That's what I say.
All right. Some more Yarra news this week. I might get your take on this, Tony. Yarra, according to a report from The Age, which came out overnight, has decided to hand back responsibility to the Victorian government for maintaining roads in some of its suburbs, stopping mowing and picking up litter. The Age has described it as a protest against the state pressuring it to cough up more money for the work, and the state government spokesperson has said, they didn't consult us on this. Now, let's just think about that for a moment.
The state government consults council all the time about any changes to laws affecting councils, don't they? We're talking here about government-owned roads. So in the context of Yarra, we're talking about, Alexandra Parade, Johnson Street, Brunswick Street, Swan Street, Bridge Road, Punt Road. Also about some Vic Track land as well. So the sort of maintenance services council currently provide, that they're indicating they'll cease, to things like pruning of trees, mowing, collecting litter, weed management, removing graffiti, sweeping the streets, etc. But according to the analysis at Yarra, they've received what's pretty paltry sum, $88,000 from the state government in financial year 22 to fund this road maintenance of government-owned roads, and the actual cost to council is over $1 million. Just maintaining a strip of a median strip on a major state government road is, according to a council spokesperson, costs $209,000 per annum. So this is again a response to that cost shift. Councillor Michael Glenartzis has said, this cost shift's one hell of a burden. We're being given absolute peanuts to run these services, and council needs to make a stand. And once again, I think this is just another indication that there are some councils that have reached sort of an absolute breaking point in terms of frustration with the impact of the cost shift. And no doubt that's exasperation, frustration arises from having to look at what services do we need to cut, or what services, do we need to reduce in order to be able to continue to, operate as council in this environment where seems to be this constant cost shift. So I think an understandable approach by Yarra, again, a unanimous vote. Is it a short-term strike to see what it elicits from state government, or is it more of a long-term move? It'll be interesting to see how the state government responds. And whether there's one would think there'd need to be some alternative maintenance regime put in place fairly soon for some of those major state government-owned roads in order for them to continue to operate in the way they do today.
So, as the story points out, it worked for Port Phillip a couple of years back. They ceased maintenance services before a new agreement was reached with the government. And the story also includes some comments from Jim McGee at Glenelg, who has been very outspoken on the issue of cost shifting. He says state and federal government cost shifting amounts to about $19 million a year on the city of Glenelg alone. So, I hate to be the squeaky wheel here, but for some time I've been saying the rate capping regime will bite a few years down the track, and we're really in the midst of councils having to make those decisions, tough decisions now because of that environment they're in.
Yeah, look, $88,000 for those major roads, which form a service for all Melburnians and Victorians will have used those roads at some point. One would think. Then it's just a paltry sum, and it needs to be significantly higher.
While we're talking about changes being imposed by the state government, which we sort of were there, whether consultation has occurred or not, some of the changes announced in the housing statement and the planning reforms recently are starting to come in. The granny flat provision, as it's being called, comes in next month. So a planning permit no longer required in the right circumstances for a second home on a property, commonly known as a granny flat, still requires building permits and compliance with some of those regulations. One council at least is fighting this. Tony Burundara has said they are opposing that and other elements of that housing statement.
Yeah, well, they certainly another unanimous resolution from 11 councillors at Burundara in this case. And in relation to that second dwelling issue, they've cited concerns about neighbourhood character, amenity, traffic, etc. But Burundara has gone much further than that in, as you say, opposing most of the key elements of the state government's recent housing statement. I think, whatever you think about Burundara's position here, I think you can't fault the accuracy of their criticisms of the housing statement. I mean, they say that it lacked detail on how the ambitious 800,000 new homes in established suburbs over the next decade, how that target would be achieved. There was a lack of detail. Well, undoubtedly that's true. We haven't seen much of the detail as yet. They condemned a lack of community and council consultation on this issue. Well, there hasn't been a lot of that. There was no sort of mandate at the state government election. There was no sort of housing statement as part of the platform policies. One of the council's planning officers there, Michaela Carter, she's a senior planning officer. She said, look, these reforms continue a trend over recent years of concentrating planning powers with the Minister for Planning, whilst removing the role of local councils and communities in decision-making on planning issues. And again, undoubtedly that's accurate. This is the trend that we're seeing to, give more power to the state government, the planning ministry in making those decisions. And certainly some councillors have come out with some strong language. Gary Thompson has said that, giving the planning minister control over large housing development projects where 10% of the project is affordable housing was, open inverted commas, a wolf in sheep's clothing. That could, pave the way for inappropriate developments. The council have really essentially told the state government to back off in relation to Camberwell Junction being included in that first batch of precincts for, increased housing density. So I think council's position probably reflects the view of a majority of its constituents and residents, and the state government then looked through this with much broader lens, different sort of prism in terms of the housing needs for Victoria overall and where they're going to fit. But this is just an indication that the government might have a bit of a fight on its hands from at least some municipalities, Burundara being one.
So I'm sure it's not an isolated view. We've had other councils commenting on various aspects of the statement. Julie, you're the planner here. In terms of the removal of a requirement for a planning permit for granny flats, what are the implications of that for council planning processes? Because let me play devil's advocate. Surely it means less work for council planners.
Well, it will do, Chris. It's not going to be significant, though. I don't think it's going to mean significant, applications are going to be, reduced. What we're going to find here is we're talking about second homes that are 60 square metres, up to 60 square metres. We're talking about properties that are 300 square metres or more. In actual fact, I recall, and I think that I saw something recently where us old planners remember way back in the day when there was a time when these small houses could be built in backyards without planning permits, and then the legislation changed and they were required to have planning permits. So I think that we're going full circle in this particular issue where there never used to be a need for these, and that's why they call them granny flats, because that's what they were called back in the time when they didn't require planning permits. So look, whether or not there'll be a rush, I don't know, of people wanting to have second homes in their backyards. There may or may not be. It might solve some issues for some people, but it's certainly not going to have a significant, I think, impact on planners. There may be an increase in the amount of work for building surveyors as a result of it. I think it's probably more likely to sit in that space where there's an increase in there. And we know that in the building surveyor space, that it's really hard to fill those roles. It's really hard to keep up with the workload that comes through the building surveyor. So again, the building surveyors are picking up that potential extra load.
Yeah, well, planners are scarce, and the government's looking for 90 new planners. I think building surveyors are even a more scarce resource.
I would agree with you.
Yes. I saw a story earlier this week out of South Australia, the city of Playford, where the council has an obligation to enforce state legislation with regard to caravans in backyards. So I guess the building requirements would preclude the potential for more people to set up caravans and live in caravans outside of legal requirements, as seems to be popping up in South Australia and other places.
Yeah, I suspect that's right. I'm not quite sure how those caravan rules work, but look, I do know that this second dwelling possible without, a permission from council arrangement is something that occurs in New South Wales and has for some time now. And when that change was made to allow that in New South Wales, there was a reasonable sort of rush of people wanting to do this more for generally often for family, to accommodate other family members. It won't, as Julie says, the other thing it won't do is it won't solve the 800,000 residents that we apparently need, these new residences. We won't sort of solve that by secondary dwellings, but it'll have some impact on the housing shortage. And I suppose for those inner established suburbs, the concern around neighbourhood amenity is, those, extra sort of structure in a backyard. Is there vegetation that's removed to accommodate that structure? Is there an impact on overshadowing, overlooking these sorts of things, even though they're relatively small structures? And that would be, I guess, part of the concern that's being expressed in Boroondara.
And there's still going to be, a lot of people that will want to develop their land and sell off part of their property in a dual occupancy sense, multiple dwellings on the property. That's where they can cash in, whereas they can't really cash in.
No, it's precluded, isn't it?
Yeah, that's right. It's not, you can't subdivide your land as a result of that property. So, but look, there's arguments for and against with both of this. And there's definitely a trend towards taking powers away from councils, which I know that local government is very concerned about.
I know this is a big question, but it just occurs to me that every state and not just in Australia, is dealing with these issues, and they're all trying different things to address it. Surely this is one of those areas where a national approach would be helpful. And I know our system's not set up to do that, but it feels like everyone's trying to solve the same problem, putting all these individual sets of resources towards it.
Yeah, well, as you say,
there's a comment.
Yeah,
okay.
Constitution's not, it
That's
doesn't
right.
go that
Now
far.
the federal constitution, isn't it? We're not recognised under the federal constitution.
No.
Why are we not recognised under the federal constitution? I know we've tried on many occasions to get that recognition. I agree with you, Tony. That's where it stems from, I believe.
Yeah. Okay.
Well, the federal government doesn't have those powers, so we would only be able to do it by way of a negotiation with state to say, well, we'll fund these things if you give us the powers. I suspect we're some way away from that. I have heard the whole housing crisis in Australia described as our US gun crisis.
Really?
You know, in the US, we have this scenario where clearly there's these deaths by this great rate of deaths because of the use of guns and the prevalence of guns in the community, and the US governments seem to be absolutely unable to deal with the issue because of the politics. And in some ways, Australia's gun crisis is our housing crisis, where we have there's so many interests. There's around capital gains tax, there's landlord tenant issues, there's negative gearing, these sorts of things, and the governments have just not been able to tackle because politically it's just one of those dangerous things to try and tackle. The community doesn't seem to be be one-minded on it.
That is not where I thought that was going to go, that conversation, but thank you, Tony. Very interesting perspective. Before we get off planning, Julie, you would have been delighted, as was I, to see that work that South Gippsland Shire have done on their coastal strategy, which has received some media coverage recently, big write-up in The Age only a week or so back. It's received an award from the Planning Institute of Australia this week.
That's right, and it's the Victorian division of the Planning Institute of Australia. They have their annual awards, and very pleased to see South Gippsland's coastal strategy winning in the climate change and resilience category. This category actually recognises joint undertaking of council and community to help protect the coastline and the coastal townships. So there was lots of engagement with the community on this project, and I think that was one of the things that was really attractive probably to the judges in this particular case. It's got some really bold actions in the strategy, which is fantastic to see. Removal of coastal township greenfield areas from the planning scheme, which is very bold. Restricting development to one dwelling per lot. Interesting that we're talking about this, but anyway, except for granny flats, obviously. To seek to preserve the environment through nature-based adaptation like Common Ground Community Initiative, and support land management through a township character study, which is always great to see. The other thing that they're doing in that is promoting emergency safety and building social resilience, which is something a little bit new, and you're starting to see that pop up more in strategies that are coming out from councils. So the criteria around originality and innovation, obviously they tick the box on that. The other kind of criteria that they look at is quality, strategic alignment, implementation, and transferability. Can this be used sort of elsewhere as well? Can other people pick up this as a bit of a model? And collaboration, which they've obviously demonstrated really strongly with their strong collaboration with the community. So well done to Karen Ellison team out at South Gippsland. Great to see.
Congrats, team. Yep. Excellent news there, and let's hope there's more of it. Tony, the Ombudsman has dropped a report this week looking at a long-running building permit matter that sort of crossed between Mitchell Shire and Yarra Ranges. When I first saw this, I thought those two councils don't border each other. How can this be? Do you understand what's happened here?
Yeah, I do. A bit of a comedy of errors, I think. And we know, of course, that Ombudsman Victoria has some responsibility for investigating complaints about councils, and this is just another investigation that's occurred, and a report's been released this week that's got some media. But it's about a 6-year bureaucratic nightmare, as the Ombudsman described it, for an elderly lady, Robin. She wanted to build a structure for her son, to house her son, who has a critical health condition. So she thought she had the correct building permit, and the structure was then constructed, but in fact she didn't. Unbeknown to her, her builder applied to the wrong council for a building permit. So her builder, in fact, applied to Mitchell Shire Council when the residence was located in Yarra Ranges Shire Council. Now, as I said, it was a comedy of errors, because what then happened is Mitchell Shire sent the building permit to, I think, the wrong person at the wrong address. So this lady, Robin, did not become aware of the actual limitations in the building permit. Her builder went and constructed the residence on the understanding that there was a valid building permit. Then a year later, Yarra Ranges Shire Council, the actual responsible authority, issued a building order in relation to health and safety concerns regarding the building. And this prompted some complaints from Robin, the landowner in question. And the Ombudsman, in her report, has indicated that, there wasn't an ideal handling of these complaints. The two councils didn't always coordinate with each other. As you said, Chris, they're not even contiguous, the two councils. So you can understand they wouldn't have had necessarily a constant working relationship, but sometimes the two councils' requirements were conflicting. And the Ombudsman said, look, neither council demonstrated the type of effective complaint handling that a ratepayer should expect. So I think it's a timely reminder that, there's a human story behind some of these complaints about permits, and that in this case, a really personal, emotional story for this lady and her very ill son. I think both those councils will be going back and looking at their complaint handling procedures, as all councils should do, and I'm sure we can all improve in this regard. And this awareness that at the end of the day, there's someone behind these complaints, and 6 years of an ongoing process to try and resolve this stuff up, which seems like a mix-up on both sides, not just on the council side, but certainly on the builder made some significant errors there in the choice of where to apply to, and then the decision to build without actually citing a building permit was a questionable decision, perhaps, but clearly some lessons for all councils in this Ombudsman's report.
Absolutely, and you can understand. You can sort of picture the stuff happening at the lower levels of both of those organisations. I know both the CEOs of those two organisations, very, very
people.
capable, good, dedicated people. I'm sure they're talking now that this has all come to light, because 2016 the structure was built. 2017 Yarra Ranges sent the letter to the owner, and here we are in 2023. So on any measure, it's not acceptable that that's still unresolved, as the Ombudsman says. So we'll wait and see if there's more to be said about that. Let's go to Baw Baw Shire Council, one of the councils that has conducted mayoral elections in this last few days, and we'll come to that in a moment. But what did catch my eye was an agreement to trial a change to council meeting frequency. And we've got a couple of stories about council meeting processes to talk about. In this one, the council is going to trial for 6 months, as I understand it, reducing their twice monthly council meetings down to one, and instead of starting at 5:30 p.m. on a Wednesday, start at 1 p.m. on a Wednesday. And this was what I thought was interesting, guys, the public submission process. So actively encouraging public submissions with regard to current issues, and deciding to hear those public submissions immediately before the decision on the relevant matter is going to be taken. I thought that was a nice sort of step towards more openness and transparency about the decision-making process.
I agree, absolutely, and I think it's great that Borbor, as I'm sure other councillors are doing, is looking at lateral ideas. We know that just the whole load of council meetings might be something that's feeding into some of these wave of councillor resignations and that. But in terms of that question, or that issue of hearing the submissions immediately before the decision is made, I think that adds to the transparency of the process, and seeing the councillors observe, listen, and then apply those learnings to the debate and a decision. What would then, of course, be critical for councillors is that they wouldn't be in the days prior to the meeting making pronouncements about how they were planning to vote, because they have yet to have heard the public submissions, so they wouldn't be wanting to go into that process with a closed mind. But
no,
I think
winky pop themselves, wouldn't they?
Yeah, that's right. But I do think that that this is a lateral approach, and it's good to be trialing some of these new approaches, including based on community feedback. So well done.
And I think it's interesting that they are taking the approach of thinking about those candidates that are likely to stand later on next year, recognising, that, the current approach isn't sort of working, like you said, Chris, before, about the workload, and trying something different so then they can get more people to stand and think about becoming a councillor. The demographics they're saying are changing up at Borbor. It's very, very different. They've got lots of growth happening, predominantly in Druin and Warrigal, and they need to respond to the changing community. So good on them. They're also recognising that they think that they can save costs in terms of officer time, catering, and councillor costs, because of making these changes. So they're thinking, really carefully about the change, but also why would this change benefit the council.
And I think that the council has been a bit sensitive to some local commentary on that issue of costs and catering, etc. as well. So good on them for trying something different. It is hard to strike a balance. I'm sure in behind the scenes their briefing processes are being adjusted as well to match this new meeting frequency that they'll be trialling for 6 months, I understand. Shout out to Mark Dupé, the CEO there, and the new mayor, the new mayor, re-elected mayor, Anne-Marie McCabe, as of this week, for giving that a try. Now, just while I'm thinking about Mark sent me a podcast recommendation this week, and he promises me he only listened to this after he listened to our podcast. That's why I took it anyway. It's about golf, and I thought, Mark Dupé, why are you sending me a podcast recommendation about golf? Check out this podcast. I've just lost the name of it for a moment. I'll find it in a second. The guest on the episode that came out this week is Dan Andrews, the recently retired Victorian Premier, talking about the challenges with balancing public space requirements against golf course uses. Now, this has been very topical in parts of Melbourne and in Sydney. I haven't listened to it all yet, Mark. I have started. Very interesting. So there's a podcast recommendation for you, and I'll just find the title of that in just a second.
Shout out to Kingston on that one, the golf course,
exactly,
and the development pressures on golf courses.
Not great timing for the Premier, maybe, the ex-Premier, in terms of his application to become a member at some golf courses recently.
Is that right?
No, that wasn't taken well by some of the members, given the COVID lockdown
Oh,
and
yes.
what happened with golf courses. So
It's called State of the Game, by the way. I was hoping you two might have something to say while I look that up in my my email list. State of the Game is the name of the podcast if you want to check that out. And while we're on meeting issues, we've talked recently about a bit of a movement to open up briefing sessions. We're seeing this not just here, but in other parts of Australia and overseas. This has been debated recently, Tony, at Mornington Peninsula Shire.
yeah, it has. Councillor David Gill, it was who put forward a proposal to open up, or well, actually, the proposal was to share summaries of briefings and workshops with the public. But you're right, Councillor Gill did say that if he had his way, the public would be invited to briefings. Even said that sessions ought to be televised, maybe sort of visually recorded there. The motion was lost 5-4. There was one councillor absent, so it's still a tight vote. But councillors who didn't agree said, for example, Councillor Sarah Race said she feared that information put in those summaries of briefings and workshops might be misinterpreted by the local media. Councillor Despy O'Connor said that the summaries might create some fear and anxiety in the community about, you know, what a forthcoming decision might likely be. So the motion was lost. I'm aware that this is a trend, you know, this discussion about opening up councillor briefings or workshops is being discussed more and more. I'm still pretty strongly of the view that there's a real merit in a closed briefing session in terms of exploring those issues without the at least without the grandstanding element of politics and the fear of how will this posing, you know, playing the devil's advocate or something be seen by the constituents. I think there's some real value in having some closed door discussions before the debate that is absolutely should be transparent, open to the public, very clear what each councillor is thinking and saying in the debate and how they vote. That's my view, but clearly there's a different view out there, and Councillor David Gill has expressed it. And there are, I think we've mentioned before, did we mention, was it Wangaratta? Is that one?
Wodonga.
Wodonga was a council that we thought we're having these more open sessions. And this move to, have summaries of the sessions put out to the public has failed, at least this time, at Mornington Peninsula Shire.
And I think Indigo might have considered it and not proceeded. And I know there's one or two New South Wales councils that certainly do open briefing sessions. There's something wrong with the math here, Tony. When you look at the article from the Herald Sun, it says the motion was lost 5 votes to 4, and it names 9 councillors and says Councillor Anthony Marsh did not attend the meeting, which makes 10. There are 11 councillors on that council, so there's obviously another missing or an abstention.
Is there not still? Has Councillor Hughes, is he still suspended?
That might be
sure about.
Hughes is from Frankston.
No, that's Frankston. That's right.
That's Frankston.
So I think the Deputy Mayor, Deborah Maher's not mentioned in that list. Okay. So not sure whether she was at that meeting or not, but in their reporting, they've missed one, it seems. Okay. Anything to add, Julie, before we move on?
No, I absolutely agree with Tony. I'm in the same space as what he is.
So let's look at some mayoral election results from the past few days. There's been a lot, so we're not going to work through all of these. There is a list on the Local Government News Roundup website, current Victorian mayors. The page is called, but a couple of note. We mentioned Baw Baw. Baw Baw now has an all-female team for the first time, following on from the new tradition, Julie, that was set at Kingston last week.
Yes, it was. So great to see that.
Absolutely. And we've got a few more results to tell you about that have come in the last few days or so. Bass Coast is one that has met this week and has elected Claire LeServe as mayor and Rochelle Halstead as deputy mayor. So there's another all-female team. I can see a little statistical exercise is going to be needed here the way it's going. Benalla has elected Danny Claridge and Justin King as mayor and deputy. Rob Amos has been returned as mayor at Campaspe this week. Marybeck, Adam Pulford is the new mayor of Marybeck, which is a council that's been in the news, of course, in recent times, and a former VLGA president in Lambros Tapanos is the deputy. And speaking of VLGA leaders, the president, current, of VLGA, Denise Massoud, has been elected as the mayor at Whitehorse. Congratulations to Denise. Yarra's had its election this week. Edward Crossland is the new mayor there. Councillor Anoub Mohammed, who was in the news a couple of years ago, you might remember, has been elected as the deputy mayor. And we've got a new mayor at Wyndham in Jenny Barrera, with Josh Gilligan elected as deputy mayor. They're just some of the results that have come in this week.
And Chris, if we're going to do the stats, I think we need to look at what's the proportion of males and females in the mayor and deputy mayor positions, because whilst you're getting a few councils that have, double female duo, I think that we need to have a look at overall the stats. Is it a bit more even across the board in terms of male female split? So let's have a look at that, shall we?
It's feeling a bit like it. Another all-female team at Knox, Jude Dwight and Serena Grasso, but there was an all-female team in place there already with Marcia Timmers-Leach and Jude Dwight last year, but does feel like a bit of a trend. And Julie, I know you noticed a couple of the results have been heralded in a different way. Yes. Ballarat and Hepburn have used town crier announcements.
I know, it's fantastic. I watched the town crier at Ballarat this morning via LinkedIn, and it was fantastic. Obviously all dressed up. I expect that these are people in the community that take on these roles, that stand outside of the town hall and announce to all of the passers-by, that here is the new mayor and the deputy mayor. Congratulations. It's just such a lovely announcement. It's really positive. It's steeped in history and tradition, obviously, and so we're seeing that in areas where they do have a lot of sort of history focus. So look, I just think it was really nice. It's worth putting on our web link, I think, and showing people what's going on across the sector, which is really positive. So there you go. Something I noticed.
Very good. All right. More results to come, of course. We're right in the thick of mayoral election season in Victoria. We're going to need to wrap this up soon. A few things to mention, perhaps just briefly. Changes to the New South Wales rate peg methodology announced late last week. Let's hope Victoria sort of takes note of this recognition now of more forward-looking metrics in the way the rate peg is calculated, taking into account employee costs, asset costs, etc., taking into account the change to the emergency services levy, which has recently occurred in the state of New South Wales. Tony, Julie, any thoughts on this?
Yeah, look, it's the Independent Pricing and Regulatory Tribunal that has this task in New South Wales, and as you say, they've seemingly responded to the council organisation, representative organisations, to change somewhat the way that they set that rate peg, and I think that's timely, appropriate, and we'd love to see those sort of responses south of the Murray as well.
All right. 4-day working weeks are in the news locally and overseas, and this will sort of bridge us into Julie's UK report as it's becoming known. Mitchellshire is doing a 4-day work week trial with, I think it's operations and parks staff, recognising, I see in the comments from Brett Luxford, the CEO there, that outdoor staff don't have the same access to flexibility in working arrangements that indoor staff do. So this trial is attempting to address that.
Yeah, 38-hour week with 9.5-hour days over 4 days. So Brett Luxford, the CEO, is keen to point out that this isn't a reduction in operational hours or any reduction in council service levels. This is a trial. But it's about, as you say, creating a more flexible working environment for some of those outdoor staff, and we've seen similar trials around the world. I think the one in South Cambridgeshire you were going to report on, was it Julie, or we saw? Yeah.
Oh well, I'll open the batting on that. It's been very newsworthy over there because the government has been trying to get them to stop it, and very recently hit them with a best value notice with all sorts of reporting requirements, because the government and the minister, the local government minister who's just changed this week, but the previous one basically said they don't see how you can be delivering value to ratepayers by getting people to work less hours for the same amount of money. It was effectively the message coming out of the government. But the council has done a review of the trial, which has been running since January. They say it's saving upwards of £750,000 in agency costs, and has delivered a lot of upticks in health and wellbeing measures for its staff. So
23% sickness reduced.
Yeah. So they're
percent
clearly wanting to hang on to this trial, Julie.
Yeah.
They're not giving in to the government at this point in time.
That's right. And they're saying that their staff turnover has been reduced by 36% in that time as well. So, physical health has improved from -3 to +3, whatever that means. But, and they believe, the motivation to come to work has changed as well from staff. So, interesting also. They're saying complaints during that time have reduced by 2.5%. So look,
Wow.
some compelling figures there, which I think are great figures and a great example of what Mitchell can look to. And it'd be interesting to see whether Mitchell can measure some of those benefits as well in the trial that they're doing. So great to be learning from our colleagues in the UK.
So the trial started in January for office-based staff. It's due to finish in this coming January. So it's a 12-month trial, but they have just recently started another trial with some outdoor staff. Too early to say how that's going to pan out, but they're saying the early signs are good. They're positive. Okay. So that's an issue that's not going to go away anytime soon. You've got some other stuff out of the UK for your pick of the week here to talk about, Julie, just briefly.
Just something very quick to say that Local Governance Association over there have come out and basically called on the government to help local government. They're saying they're going to have a £4 billion deficit in coming years, and it's really getting serious now, and they're calling on the government to help by providing more funding. It's no different to what we've heard in the previous few months, but just re-emphasising that. But just another quick local news that's reported on today, Chris, that's come out from the City of Wyndham, which is about them wanting to transform its low-rise urban sprawl and car-choked streets with a new housing plan. So housing is very much in the forefront of a lot of councils' planning at the moment. They want to put urban into suburban, and they're encouraging denser, more walkable neighbourhoods, reviving leafy yards. So very good. They're putting that message out. They're saying to the developers, we are wanting a different approach. We don't want poorly designed homes. We want to stop proliferation of black roofs and double garages and things like that. We want low-rise development not to be spread out and be car dependent. We want you to think about how they're going to have better access to public transport. So nothing new, I suppose, but they've come out with a really, really strong message that was reported in The Age today, I believe. So,
all right. Thanks, Julie. We probably do need to wrap it up. Our episodes have been getting longer and longer, I've noticed of late. No one's complained yet, although I might have just opened the door for that. Anything you want to add, Tony, before we wrap up?
No, I'm off to the LG Pro Women's Forum. I think Julie's got a gig there too today, so that'll be exciting. And so all the best to LG Pro and the organisers of that. I think that'll be a fun event.
And that's perhaps a giveaway for astute listeners and viewers that we recorded this episode early this week on Thursday, because Friday is Fast Track Day, the Leadership Development Day for the VLGA at the RACV Club in Melbourne. I'm looking forward to that immensely. We've got some terrific panelists to talk on the topic of civility in local government through the course of the day. And I think it's just about, as we speak, sold out, although we might have managed to squeeze in one or two more by the time you hear this. So there we go. Julie, all the best to you for the week ahead. I know it's a busy time for you, so full speed to you.
Yep, round the state. Really, really enjoying work with a number of councils, and particularly enjoying work with councillors at the moment. Fantastic.
Excellent. Well done. Someone has to do it. Julie, so good luck to you, and you too, Tony. Have a great week.
Absolutely.
All the best to you both. We'll see you back here next week for another edition of TGU from VLGA Connect, brought to you by Hunt and Hunt Lawyers. Thank you for watching and listening, and we'll see you next time. Bye for now.